And again, there as well, for a very long time, up until not too long ago, the major theories about the etiology or causality of schizophrenia were was called schizophrenic mother. Schizophrenic means schizophrenia causing mother, right? Presumably a mother that's giving mixed messages, that's saying one thing that means something else, and therefore raising the kid in a crazy environment, so the kid doesn't have it can't make sense of the real world, so he retreats into a world of his own. Crazy stuff. People believed it, and to this day there are still some major theorists who still believe that kind of nonsense. Ideas about homosexuality. Okay, parents obviously, in most cases, are terribly upset if they suspect or they find out the child is homosexual, and again, carry often a lot of guilt. And that's because, again, of many of the notions about the causality, the notions about mother-son interactions, about wanting the other sex child, about who knows, all kinds of nonsense that pervaded the field. It's very, very clear that in all of the examples that I just gave, we are talking about biological problems. There is no doubt about it. You can't have such a major disorder and talk about somebody who swore at the kid. I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy. It's mind-boggling that anyone actually seriously suggests it, and yet people do seriously suggest it. I mention that because it's important to know that we can't carry all the burden, because if we carry so much of the burden, we are bound to really perhaps carry an unfair burden for the rest of our lives. Just one last story. A friend of mine, and we've been in touch over the years, and this guy is an incredible guy. He's really a very special person. In fact, very often when I work with patients who are having social problems, having problems interacting with people, feel uncomfortable, don't know what to say when they're with people, I often mention to them that the one thing that people really like to talk about is themselves. So if you don't know what to say, ask them about them, okay? Really, and it's a tremendous thing, really. It always works. You ask them about them, what are they doing, how do they feel about it, you know, and you really show an interest. Everybody loves someone who wants to know about them, and right, it's the favorite topic, yeah?
Sometimes we're asking the wrong question about them. Something they don't want to talk about at all.
So then they'll tell you, but I mean, obviously you don't ask something very private. What I'm saying is they will offer information while they're talking. So they'll say something about something they're doing. So try to listen to what they're saying and then say, you know, pick up on that. They mentioned they went skiing. Do you go often? Do you like it? It must be fun. I never went skiing. What's it like? Right? Whatever. Just try to pull questions, but show an interest in what they're doing and what they have. Okay. The reason I mention that is because, and sometimes I actually bring it up, because this guy, this friend that is phenomenal at that. I mean, all throughout our life, everybody I knew loved this guy. They loved him because he would talk, no matter who he talked to, he listened. He really listened. He asked questions, and he wasn't just trying to put you on. He really cared. He was a very sincere person, a very caring person. People could sit with him for hours. I mean, talking about themselves, right? People do that with me too, but I get paid for it, right? He didn't get paid. He was just, and he would do it every once in a while. I'd be walking with him. He'd start talking with a guard or, I don't know, somebody on the corner or whatever, and he'd be standing there for an hour talking to them, and people loved him. He was an incredible guy, and his wife is a very special person as well. This guy, in addition to being incredibly a phenomenal guy socially, he is very bright. He's a very successful businessman as well. He writes, he does all kinds of stuff, and he is always there for his friends and for his family. I mean, it's amazing to me because I run around a lot. He's almost always home whenever I call, right, in spite of the fact that he's into a million different things. And so he really puts a lot into his family and his children. They were commiserating with us. We went out with them, and they were talking for 2 hours, pouring their hearts out about their son, and it's been going on for years and years. It's like this kid did not grow up in their home, right? It's like a foreign, like a stranger. I mean, you know, the values that they abhor. You know, he's really very stingy. He's selfish. He doesn't care about anybody else. He's out to get, and he just doesn't care. And they can't believe it. And they talked to him and they tried to, they did everything they could. And this kid, and they really, and the most amazing thing, and I can understand it, was the mother said to us that You know, it's reached a point where she shudders to admit it, but she hates him. She can't, I mean, and by the way, you know, that sounds terrible, but I'm sure at some points at least, for minutes, maybe for hours sometimes, you hated your kids. It's not so terrible. It's normal, okay? Sometimes they're just so impossible. You feel hate. That's a normal kind of feeling, okay? But for her, what she was saying was that it's an ongoing kind of thing, and it's overwhelming, and understandably so. But I'm looking at that couple. I can't conceive of better parents, okay? What happened? I don't know. But the reason I mention that is that it's important for us to realize that you all know, I certainly know people who are terrible, abusive, horrible, horrendous parents who somehow come up with wonderful kids, and you see the opposite as well, okay? Now I mention that because it's not healthy, it's not helpful to carry so much of the burden, okay? We need to know we can't do everything. We can't, it's not all in our hands. So much so, in fact, and this is important just in terms of understanding what children are like. There was a famous study done in the 1950s, the New York Longitudinal Study, it was called. It was done by 2 psychiatrists and a pediatrician who wanted to see what children were like as babies, as infants, how they were raised, and how they turned out as the years progressed, how stable were some of the things that they saw in young children when they grew up. So this was a longitudinal study. They took 133 children who were infants. They looked at them, they observed them, they interviewed the parents, they watched the parent-child interactions. Every year or 2 years or whatever, they came back and made some other observations and questionnaires or whatever. And over the years, they followed these kids into young adulthood, okay? And one of the things, first of all, they saw in babies, that babies differ on 9 major characteristics. Right at the beginning, right from the very beginning. These issues are called temperament. And babies are different from one another right at the very beginning. A, activity level, how much and how often a child or a person moves, okay? I remember very well when my oldest daughter was born. She was born a week apart from my nephew. My sister had a son. A week, I think my nephew was a week older than my daughter. The one thing that was amazing was, right from the very beginning, my daughter was fidgety, demanding. She seemed to be awake all the time. I don't remember for the first 5 months. I mean, the only image I have is walking back and forth with her, passing her back and forth with my wife. I mean, she was continually crying, very demanding, very, you couldn't put it down. I remember I used to see my sister's baby, and I couldn't believe it. The kid was so placid and quiet, right? He was hungry. She said, eh. Gave him a bottle and he lied there, and he was so pleasant and he was so easy. What's going on here? You know what? They come into the world this way. They come into the world different. Every child has his own stamp, his own personality, his own temperament, okay? And these are the 9 characteristics of temperament that people are different on, and they come into the world different to begin with, okay? Activity level, rhythmicity or regularity, predictability of biological functions, like appetite, sleep, eliminate. Some kids sleep through the night after a month, right? And some kids just 6 months, 7 months, what's going on? Okay, I can't, this is crazy, right? What's going on, right? Some kids are on a very regular schedule, and they're very happy to be on a regular, and some kids, you know, you can't follow them, all right? It's impossible to follow around, right? Some are very regular, some are very irregular. Those are things that you can see in the children right from the very beginning. 3, approach withdrawal, how readily a person accepts new people and situations. Some kids are outgoing, they're ready to accept new situations, they're not afraid or not terribly afraid. You know, as kids reach that point of stranger anxiety, it's normal that they will be anxious with other people, but they warm up quickly, some. And some are terrified, they won't go near anybody for a long, long time. And even then, only with a lot of difficulty. Okay, so approach withdrawal. Adaptability, how readily a person accepts transitions, like switching to a new activity. Some kids can go from one thing to the next very quickly and it's fine. And some kids need continuity. They really can't let go of something so quickly. You got to do it slowly, give them a chance, right? They really hold on to stuff. sensory threshold, sensitivity to physical stimuli like noise, light, touch. Some kids are very sensitive. Some kids are tuned out. They don't react very much. Quality of mood, whether a person's usually state is cheerful and pleasant or gloomy and unfriendly. Okay, that's amazing. If you consider that children are different right at the very beginning in terms of things like cheerfulness or gloominess. I mean, that's really something, okay? Because we don't really think of that. We think the kids seems to be gloomy or down to something, we did something wrong, right? Something going on here. When you start to realize that a lot of these things are built in, they're inborn, okay? Intensity, how strong a person's response are, loudness, force of temper, how strongly they react, how strongly their emotions express themselves. Distractibility, whether the person changes behavior easily or quickly in response to external stimuli or takes a lot of time. Attention span, persistence, how long a person pursues an activity, and you mentioned about motivation, right? Whether or not how long attention lasts in the face of something gets in the way and they lose it, they're on to something else, okay? Some kids can persist and will go back to it over and over, and some kids give up very easily, okay? So these are differences that you can see from one child to the next. On each of these things, there's a continuum of these. It's not all or nothing or one side or the other. But these are differences that children seem to be born with. Even more amazing is that these differences are stable. That means a kid who tends to be a cheerful baby will tend to be a cheerful adult. A baby who is predictable and regular will probably be somewhat regular as an adult. And a kid who's not probably will not be as an adult, okay? And tends to, these are things that seem to follow through, and that's really amazing because we're talking about, not only temperamental stuff that's there to begin with, but seems to play a very major role in terms of later on, okay? This same study, this New York longitudinal study, also demonstrated and found about 65% of the children that they studied fell into one of three categories. 40% fell into the category that they call the easy child, okay? That's a child who has moods of mild to moderate intensity, usually positive, right? So he responds well to novelty and change, not afraid. He quickly develops regular sleep and feeding schedules. He's regular. He takes to new foods easily. He's interested in trying new things, not afraid of new things. Smiles at strangers, not afraid too much. He adapts easily to new situations, accepts most frustrations with little fuss. He takes something away, he's on to something, he cries a minute and then goes on to something else. Very easy to deal with. Adapts quickly to new routines and rules of new game. No problem, okay? That's called an easy child. About 40% of the children they looked at fell into that category, okay? The second category is the difficult child. The 10% of the children fell into this category of difficult child. That was a child who was, in terms of moods, had intense and frequently negative moods, in distinction to the easy child, who had usually positive moods, okay? So the kid is grumpy a lot, right? The kid responds poorly to novelty and change. You introduce something new, and the kid doesn't respond well. He wants what he's used to. He wants the same book over and over and over and over, and you try to introduce something else, and he gets very upset. He wants regularity. Sleeps and eats irregular in terms of biological functions, accepts new foods slowly. He doesn't like change. Is suspicious of strangers, adapts slowly to new situations, reacts to frustration with tantrums, gets very upset easily, adjusts slowly to new situations or routines, cries often, cries loudly, and laughs loudly. Okay? That's the difficult child. The third type is a slow to warm up child. 50% of the children fell into that category, and that's a child somewhere in between. He has mildly intense reactions, both positive and negative, whereas the difficult child was negative, the easy child was positive. This kid runs both directions. Responds slowly to novelty and change, but does respond, whereas the difficult child responds poorly, and much less so. Sleeps and eats more regularly than the difficult child, but less regularly than the easy child. So somewhere in between. Shows mildly negative initial response to new stimuli, like a first encounter with a bath, a new food, a new person, a new place, entering school, another new situation, right? So he's mildly negative to begin with, but then will adapt to it. And then finally, gradually develops liking for new stimuli after repeated unpressured exposures, but it takes a while for him to warm up to it, okay? Now, if you had to choose, what kind of kid would you like to have? I mean, who in the world wouldn't like to have an easy child? That's wonderful. But you know what? They didn't take our orders when we decided to have a child. Nobody asked us. Whoever or however it's decided, it's decided. The point that I'm making is that an awful lot of what children are and what they become is stamped in to begin with. And it's important to know that for a reason that I'll explain in a moment. On the other hand, I do not want to give you the impression that I'm saying parents don't have any input. What I'm trying to say, though, is that we can't carry all the responsibility, nor, by the way, all the praise. But it doesn't matter. If you want to carry the praise, kid turns out wonderful, and you take all the credit for it, that's okay. That's not too difficult to do, even though you don't really deserve all of it any more than you deserve all the blame if something goes wrong. Okay, but in any case, the point is, I think it's important to know we can't do everything, and we don't do everything, and kids bring their own temperament to begin with. They have their own personalities. They make up their own mind. They go through their own decisions. And while we do certainly play a role, it's not perhaps as major a role as sometimes we think. On the other hand, I do want to say clearly that the other side of the coin, of course, is that of the factors that are not determined when a child comes into the world, and obviously there are many, the kind you mentioned, somebody mentioned, traumatic situations. Obviously, that's not determined before. Whether or not somebody dies, somebody gets sick, the parent is poor, and they have difficulty buying the kid a new toy. What kind of school he goes to, whether his friends are drug addicts, or smoking at a young age, whatever. Those kinds of things have a powerful influence on children. So those are kinds of things, obviously, that are not determined in advance. Those are things that are going on in the kid's environment. We have some control or input with regard to many of those issues. In terms of all the issues that it can impinge on a child, besides the ones that are given, that are built in, that somehow are almost biologically predisposed, of all the things that can make a difference, of all the variables that are somewhat modifiable, parenting is the single most important one. So on the one hand, we need to understand and know that, because if things don't go well, you can't hit yourself over the head, because it's not going to help, first of all, and second of all, it's not realistic. All you can do is your best, and that's all you have to try to do. But you have to try to do that. The other side of the coin, again, is that we can make a difference, okay? And we will talk more about how to try to make that difference. The last thing, I want to say also that I think that one of the problems that has come out as a result of the changes that we've been living through over the last 20, 30, 40 years with regard to women's liberation and the changes in terms of women going to work, and a vast majority of women working in some way or other, one of the negative outcomes of that has been, I believe, further devaluing taking care of children. One of the problems has been, I really think that one of the problems that women have had to face and struggle with is not that they weren't given opportunities to do things that are important, but rather anything that women did was held to be unimportant. Whereas the truth is, if you really think about it, I can't think of a single thing more important in life than molding a child, than being there for a child and helping him learn about the world. It's amazing. The fact is that a college professor gets more status, gets more pay, but the truth is, big deal. I mean, you can get almost anything you can get from the college professor, you can get from a book, from the library, you don't need them. The parent, the nursery school teacher, I mean, unfortunately doesn't get paid very much. Those are very, very important models and roles to play, and in terms of parenting, there is no more important function that any of us can serve. And unfortunately, we live in a world that devalues that. It's what you produce, it's what kind of title you have, that's what the world looks at and says is important. We need to remind ourselves there's something even more important than that really and truly spending time trying to help our children grow up the best way they can is one of the most important things that we can do. Okay, just finally, as we go through some of the many issues that we will try to cover, I want to mention that it's easy to feel guilty when we talk about things that are appropriate or helpful or better than others, or things that maybe are negative. It's easy to feel guilty. The saddest words that a parent can say is, "I wish I had." But in some ways, those words can be very exciting if we change them to, "Next time I will." And that's what this is all about. What we're going to do from now on, and learning to do things a little bit different. And again, we're not going to change overnight. You're not going to become different people. Your kids are not going to become different children, right? You're going to deal with the same kinds of issues. But if you can change one small part of the way you interact with your child in a positive way, that can have incredible dividends for the rest of your child's life and your life. So it's very important and worthwhile. This is the conclusion of Volume 2 of the 6-tape series entitled How to Raise Happy Children in an Unhappy World. Other tapes in this series will deal with such issues as teaching children about sex, inculcating values in our children, helping children develop a healthy sense of self-esteem, and discipline without damage. For information or to order any of the other tapes in the workshop series, write to People Power, 5800 Cavendish Boulevard, Suite 501, Montreal, Quebec, H4W 2T5, or call area code 514-481-1918.